Welcome back to the Geeks from the Multiverse podcast. We have a great episode for you. We're going back in time and talking about Back to the Future. So that's right. We're going to strap in. We're going to set those dials to 1985. We're going to go back in time. So let's get geeky.
All right, Matt. So, we were talking a little bit before the episode on, just the overall view of one of the cult classics, I would say now. And I know it sounds weird to say, Back to the Future, right? Because, like, it really is, I would say, a really awesome movie in really all three parts.
Right.
And, in a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
different ways. I mean, but, I look at Back to the Future as if you haven't seen this movie, how dare you? Like, because
Yeah.
you should have already seen this movie.
I think if you haven't seen this movie, one, you need to shut this podcast off. And maybe you need to find another podcast about like flowers or shopping,
Or ASMR, if that's your,
like
liking.
somebody licking a microphone, like something other than this.
Yeah, and I would say that get a history lesson, my friend, because I'm gonna tell you, if you haven't explored the '80s, again, go back in time, go see this. I guarantee you're gonna be like, wow. And I mean, it's funny though. You and I were talking about how Back to the Future really mentioned a lot of interesting, like futuristic. I would say like technology and different things, kind of like what The Simpsons has done, like The Simpsons, like the TV show and whatnot, like how they've like created the show, and then all of a sudden they show like different scenes on like politicians, like Donald Trump, right? Because they were like, oh well, maybe Donald Trump could become president one day. Lo and behold, here he is.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things, and so it's interesting that Back to the Future was a movie before its time, and it showed a lot of interesting technology,
Well, it
right?
had an
You
interesting
know,
concept too. I mean, it really was like going back and trying to fix something from the past that really didn't need to be fixed. Like it's really like controlling your own destiny.
Right, and I would also say this movie's like the butterfly effect, right? Because you change one thing, it's gonna destroy
Yeah.
everything around you. So not only just like if you change one thing in the past, I mean, clearly the future is gonna be totally different. And so like that's what Back to the Future kind of does as well. Like, granted he goes back in the past, then he goes to the future, and then he even goes further way back in the past. So it's interesting how they have to keep going back and forth like that. But it's just because of one moment. Now they have to
Right.
do all these
Right.
different parts to the series.
Yeah, and it's interesting how like you have all three movies, but like they go back in the past and they change one little detail, and it changes like 1985, but 1985 changes how 2015 exists.
Well,
So
right.
now they have to go into the future to change 2015, and in doing that, like obviously they go into 1885 to do all that, but like it's really like if you just kind of left things the way they were and didn't adjust anything, things would have worked out normally how they were supposed to.
Right. And it's interesting how Doc Brown, how he just was like, hey, Marty, I got this cool machine. Marty's kind of like, I don't believe you, and he's like, putting in the vegetables and all the like the junk, and he's like throwing it in there. And, Marty just like, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you putting gas in? He's like, well, where we're going, you don't, I don't remember exactly what he said off the top of my head, but basically it was just interesting. Like, he was like not believing him in that moment. And he was
Well,
just
they
like,
put
this is a weird
he
concept.
put that like the juicer basically was what it
Oh, yeah. No,
was
yeah.
it basically like made it made trash into fuel. But I think the quote that you're looking for was like where we're going, we don't need roads.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. Right. Right. I just, again, it's been a
Because I
while
mean,
since
he
I've seen it, but
basically
yeah.
made the DeLorean able to fly.
Right, and I mean, especially when, that one famous scene where, Doc gets killed and then Marty, jumps into the DeLorean, and then he goes back in time without realizing it, and then he's just all of a sudden he's like, "Where am I?" And then he has
Yeah.
to meet up with Doc, and he has to like figure out how can he get back to his original time. And then, of course, the movie goes on
Yeah,
and explains other things.
he's
But
doing, I think, what we would all do in that present moment. Like we see somebody who's peeping, and we go, "What the heck is this guy doing?" And we stop him from doing it, not knowing like, "Oh crap, this guy's my dad."
yeah, and not even realizing that.
Not knowing in that moment, like you just stopped something that was meant to happen, and in the process of that happening, you actually fall out of said tree, and the car hits you, and now you're the object of the history now.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we'll talk about it later, but the whole dynamic between Marty and his mother is a very interesting topic,
it's
which we will mention that in
it's very
like the
interesting.
next episode. But
Yes.
I mean, the overall concept of this, all like three parts. I mean, it's interesting because you know they're basing everything off of in the 1980s, and trying to predict what the future is going to be, right? Because a lot of the technology that we have now, some of it is true, and some of it was kind of over exaggerated in some ways.
Yeah, definitely over exaggerated. I think, when they were looking at, the future and looking at 2015, I mean, obviously they're in 1985, so they had no idea what 2015 was going to look like, but I think they had an idea that like in 2015, like we weren't going to have flying cars. Like we weren't going to have some of this technology.
No, but like, like for example, like the hoverboard, right? Because like that was a thing that they were like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen. I mean, they have a version of it, but it's not quite the exact version that, Back to the Future shows in the actual, show or the,
Yes.
the movie. But like, they have different things like the what was it, the Nike, like
The
the
Air
lacing,
Mags,
yeah, the Air
this is what
Mags,
they're
yeah.
called, yeah.
So like there's certain things about it that have,
Well, like
fit.
flying cars and certain things
Yeah.
that like are like we don't have flying cars, and they knew back then like
Well,
in
hold on.
2015 we weren't going to have flying cars.
No, but I mean, there are prototypes. I know that there are some prototypes that are designed to like either like flow on water and like flying like in an aircraft kind of like form, but it's not quite the way they do it like
The
off
way
road.
they have it, I mean, in Back to the Future, the way that they showed it was especially in part 2, there was a highway,
Yeah, they're like a sky highway basically. Yeah.
yeah, where cars were clearly flying.
Right. I mean, we're not anywhere close to
No, we're
that
not
right
anywhere close.
now. I mean, granted, it
Anywhere
would
close to that.
eliminate some of the traffic, that's for sure. But I mean,
Maybe.
maybe. I mean, it might actually be worse. I feel like, if you're like there's an aircraft coming your way, I feel
I
like
might want to drive at that point because there might be less traffic driving.
that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, but yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Um, so man, I was thinking about it. The What? Because I actually didn't know this, but what is the original concept, for this movie?
So, I mean, the initial concept, I mean, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis were the ones who wrote Back to the Future. And in the 80s, they wanted to develop a film that was about time travel that struggled to create like that, satisfying narrative that they were kind of desperate for. Cause like, I think that there were time travel stories that were already created in that time frame, but they didn't quite create that like story that they were looking for. So when Gail visited his parents, he came across his dad's yearbook,
Oh, okay.
and he kind of came across his thought like, what if my dad and I were friends when he was in high school?
I mean, I feel like my dad would like,
And
not want to be friends with me. I feel like he'd be like, "What are you doing, loser?" Like, and then like push me away or something.
his dad didn't quite think so, but he realized like he could test his theory if he could travel back in time when he was his parents like age, and like he shared this idea with Zemeckis, who he also talked to his mother about the past, and his mother would share these childhood stories, but they were often contradictory. So they were
Interesting.
very, very different. So it was like they kind of like sketched out this idea and acted out each scene, and they kind of developed this story that ended up being like Back to the Future. It was like they believed like time travel films focused on the past being immutable and wanted to show, the past being altered and the effect that the changes would have on the future.
I, I think it's interesting that when these two guys met, they were kind of like thinking to themselves, okay, what could be a movie that could literally, in some ways, just like alter, I guess, the movie industry. Because like they didn't think about it back then, but like you never would have thought like even now, right? Because like if that movie, like if those series of films never came out, how would the '80s actually look like? You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Because like
Yeah.
it is the reason why I say it is a cult classic, right? Because I know some older fans out there apologize, but you know it is like it's a great set of films and everything, and of course like everyone's like, yeah, I want to go see in the movies, I want to go do this, and like it became such a big phenomenon, like in so many different ways. I mean, granted, I know you and I were talking about it, but like you're right. I couldn't even imagine like Michael J. Fox, for example, um, you know, let's say doing another film right now because we understand that, yes, he has Parkinson's. He can't really act as well. He can't do all that, like he used to. And even Christopher Lloyd, he's already in his like, I'm pretty sure he's in his 90s. So it's like he's already pushing it. And so having those two main characters, like you couldn't recreate a film
You
like
couldn't
that,
recreate it. Yeah.
or it would be very difficult. And so, I agree that, these guys, I would agree that if you ever remade it, like you're really dishonoring the legacy that it has
Yeah.
because you couldn't really recreate it. I mean, we have a
Yeah.
lot of technology for sure. Like we could, put in people's faces like CGI, but it's not the same.
It wouldn't be the same, and you would be losing that same spark, even if you remade it with somebody else, or you made kind of a new, spin-off movie where it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel, it's not a remake. It's just kind of a new Back to the Future story. It still kind of wouldn't be the same.
Right. It's not the same nostalgia. I think that's
Yeah.
really what it is,
Yeah.
you know?
Um, but they wanted to make this movie based on, kind of this experience that they had with, visiting his parents, which is kind of a crazy thing. Like, you're just visiting your parents and you're like, we should make a movie of somebody going back in time and, you know, changing something in the past, and then now their parents don't meet. Like, that doesn't happen nowadays.
No,
Like,
you're right. I mean, that sorry, was an original design, right?
yeah,
Because like, unfortunately we've talked about it before where, a lot of people have gone basically they'll make a movie, but it's actually based in like let's say back in like the 60s when they originally made it, and then they're just recreating the wheel
right.
in a way, and they're not really using original ideas anymore. Like that was an original film.
That
Like
was
that
an
was an
original
original
idea.
idea,
Right.
right? So like that's where I'm thinking that a lot of movies nowadays that's the service that they're doing to themselves because they're oh wait what's that called chat GPT like
Oh yeah,
I keep
AI.
telling you like I feel like the AI should just take over for writing and then we get rid of the
I
writers.
I actually said that in a post not too long ago.
Yeah, you're right. You did. And I just think it's funny that we should look at that because clearly we need to have the writers take a break and let AI take over for a little bit and actually
And
start doing stuff.
I'll actually mention the post because in the actual posting was an article saying that they were thinking about doing She-Hulk season 2.
Oh boy.
And
With AI?
in my post I said maybe they should look at using AI to write season 2 script since the writers are on strike,
No, I
because
agree.
maybe it won't be crap.
No, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of like TV shows that could have easily done that. And I think you know what, if you start with one, then why not do it with all the other ones?
I mean,
Especially
maybe they
coming
should
out.
have started with the Flash movie.
I mean, yeah,
I'm not
I mean,
going
no, no,
I'm
no,
going to
I
leave it
agree.
at that,
I
but
agree.
in the draft that they wrote, they basically had wrote that video pirate, and I use quotations here, video pirate Professor Brown, builds a time machine that sends his young friend Marty back in the 1950s where he interrupts his parents' first meeting.
I feel like you could have said young Ward kind of like a
Young
Batman.
Ward.
Yeah, like my
Yeah.
young ward Robin. It's like I don't know. That just reminded me of that. But I mean, that's kind of what he was to him, in some ways. I mean, he was a young lad that was like he was taking him under his wing in some ways.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think the movie never really explains how they initially met.
Oh, I agree. I would always love to know how these two
Oh yeah,
met
I would love to know.
because these two,
I'm assuming maybe he was like a student or mentor or something. I mean,
I feel like it's got to be a mentor or something. I mean, I feel like Marty was that dumb kid who just didn't know what was going on with his life, and then he was just like, "Oh, you know what? I want to choose this guy. I want to give him a really interesting life." And then,
it'd be interesting if he was like Morty.
oh, you're right. It could be like a Rick and Morty. It very well could be. Maybe that's how they got it.
Maybe Marty was a clone.
Mm.
Hmm.
Do you want to go down the rabbit hole?
No, I don't.
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe next episode
Maybe next episode.
because
Yes,
this is a part one of two.
that's true. So let's talk about the characters, right? So I mean, I think we got the gist of like the concept, but like the initial casting, I understand that Marty McFly was originally not even supposed to be Michael J. Fox.
That's correct. Because the one thing about Michael J. Fox was when this movie was initially like, the script was made and casting was done. Michael J. Fox was currently doing Family Ties. So Family Ties was filming, and they did not want to damage Family Ties' success with him doing this movie.
So I do know that there is a documentary that shows um, Michael J. Fox basically doing both Back to the Future and doing Family Ties. And it was like he was running back and forth. So he would sit there. So he would basically wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning,
Yeah.
then go do Family Ties, and then he would go film, and then I think he would go back to Family Ties again, and then it was like he would do that
Oh
every
yeah,
single
yeah, yeah,
day,
yeah.
and it was ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah,
the
it
man
was
was
it was
working like 16 hours
grueling.
a
Yeah,
day.
it was grueling. Yeah.
Yeah, and like literally had no time to
There was a
himself.
story where he was on the set of Family Ties and he was looking for a prop, and the prop that he was looking for was a camera, and the camera was actually a prop for Back to the Future.
Oh, of course.
And there were, so it was kind of like this funny thing, like he's looking all over, like I'm looking for this camera, and they're like, that's not a prop for this show,
I
you
mean,
know.
because credit. I mean, he was what? I think he was he like 2018? I was like, he was like in his
he was
early,
he was pretty young, yeah.
yeah, like, and so he's like juggling both, and it's crazy. Like he was basically the film star in that sense. As a
Yeah, and
young
that's what,
actor.
him in Family Ties and how he acted in that show was what drew, Galen Zemeckis to, him being in Back to the Future. It was like his comedic timing and his clumsiness, like his overall character in that show was what they thought Marty McFly was as a character.
So, yeah, like I was gonna say, like in the original, casting, I know. So I had to look. I know I had to look him up because I had no idea who this exact person was. But Eric Stoltz, right? So
Yep.
Eric Stoltz was originally the person, and then when I looked at him, I said, oh, okay, I can see why they would want to choose him. Like the person, maybe like the looks and the personality, maybe a little bit, but like I didn't. And when I looked at the movies that he did, I mean, granted, I was looking at it, and I'm like. I don't even know. Maybe some of the movies, maybe,
So
but like it wasn't a really well-known
at the
actor.
time, Eric Stoltz was a very serious actor. He just came off a movie,
Oh, okay.
and for the life of me, I forget what the movie is. Um, but it was he's played very serious roles. And when he was on this movie, he was very much a method actor. He probably still is a method actor. But when he was on this movie, he was method acting. So when he was on camera, when he was off camera, he was always Marty McFly.
So
And
it's almost like if you had to do
and,
like if you're playing the Joker, like in that
and
sense.
that was very much like, when you have Jared Leto. When he was playing Joker, he was method acting and he was Joker all the time. And he had a lot of conflicts with the cast and the crew. It was very much like the same thing with Eric Stoltz. Like there was times when he had a lot of conflicts with the cast and the crew. And eventually they decided like he just wasn't right for the role
And
because
yeah.
like the way he was playing the character was serious. Like he had said like he wasn't a comedic actor. Um he had no idea why they would like cast him in this role if they were looking for a comedic actor, but he was playing the role very seriously, and that's why they ultimately like recast him because he just wasn't right for the role. And they went back to Michael J. Fox and they said like, "Hey, you know, let's work out a deal." And then they worked out a deal with
With Family Ties, yeah.
family ties, and they did all that. But Eric Stoltz, like I said, he was coming off a movie, called Mask,
Yes.
and he was playing, a character that had kind of a distorted face, and it was a very serious role with Cher.
Okay,
Um,
yeah. No, I remember seeing like some scenes. I don't remember seeing the whole entire film, but
but yeah, I mean, he just wasn't right for the movie, and he actually filmed a lot of scenes in this movie. And if you go to YouTube, you could actually see, there is one scene when he's in the calf, that kind of, um, I want to call it a cafe, but it's not a cafe. It's a like a roadhouse, kind of
oh yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
diner, I guess you call it. Um, it's back in the 50s, and it's when Biff kind of shows up and he's talking to
Oh
George, and
yeah,
it's that scene when Michael J. Fox usually is when the scene that we know it.
yeah.
He's kind of peeking around the corner, like you see
Well,
his
yeah,
head kind
yeah.
of peek around Biff. Except in this scene, it's Eric Stoltz.
Okay. No, 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 no. Yeah. So I know what you're talking about. It's also like George was sitting there, and then Biff comes out of nowhere. He like starts beating the crap out of him, or like pick him up and like throw him against the. I think it was like the table or something. I don't know what it was, but
Yeah,
basically, yeah. Like
he's
he's
kind of giving
like,
him a
yeah,
noogie. Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So
and you see Biff, he's giving him the noogie, and he sees, he knows it's George, and but you kind of see him like looking at George because he's kind of dumbfounded that like I'm looking at my dad.
yeah, and I mean, I feel like kind of going back to the beginning of like the whole Marty McFly thing. Like I couldn't imagine Eric Stoltz like playing him. Like if it was that serious of a role, you know what I mean? Because like
Yeah,
Michael J. Fox was that kind of like comedian, kind of like he played a little bit serious, but then he would but he would have
well, it
his
was
funny
like
moments and
that clumsiness and that comedic timing, and the unknownness of his situation. Like I think
well,
that's what really made
and
Marty McFly. But when you play it serious, it takes the comedy out of it and it makes it a drama.
well, and I agree, and I also think that with really Marty McFly, I mean he's supposed to be this young kid, right? And so like Michael J. Fox was already a young kid as it was, so it kinda made more sense to go with somebody a lot probably younger because I don't know how old he was in, like, that time frame, but, like, I guarantee you
Yeah.
Michael J. Like, again, he was, like, in his, like, 18, 20. Like, he already was in a young enough role where he could continue on and still do all that, but, um, you know, with basically the next character, though, like
Well, there were other actors that were considered, so I
okay,
do kind
my
of
bad.
want to read them off real quick because
Okay.
some of them are quite interesting, actually. So some of the other actors that were considered, I do think Michael J. Fox was always considered number one for um Marty McFly. Eric Stoltz was ultimately picked, but some of the other actors were John Cusack, C. Thomas Howell, Johnny Depp.
I mean, Johnny Depp, I would've I don't know how well you would have done that, right? Because I mean, you
Well, Ralph Macchio. I mean, I don't know about that.
I mean, I'm
The,
looking at it too because
the next one, Charlie Sheen. I mean,
no,
could you
no,
imagine?
wait, no, I could not. I mean, no, not even a chance. I mean,
John Cryer. I mean,
no,
Ben Stiller,
Peter
Peter
DeLuise,
DeLuise, Billy Zane, George Newbern,
Robert Downey
Robert
Jr.
Downey Jr., Christopher Collette. I don't know who that is, to
I
be
don't
honest.
either. Yeah,
Matthew Modine,
nope. And Corey Hart.
Corey Hart. So those are some of the actors that were considered for, you know, Marty McFly.
I mean, I would say Johnny Depp, Charlie Sheen, Billy Zane, Ben Stiller, Robert Downey Jr.
I don't know if any of those guys would have really done it
No,
any justice, to
and
be
I
honest.
think, I mean, granted, I understand Robert Downey Jr. was, he was big in the '80s and '90s, and kind of that
I mean,
scene.
even
But
Ralph Macchio in Karate Kid, he has the new series right now
yeah, no, but
in Karate Kid, and he's still not a good actor.
okay, as a kid, I think he did better than he did now with it being an
In
adult.
Karate Kid back in the 80s, he was not a good actor.
Well, okay, listen, what I'm saying is, I mean, the Karate Kid though is another great,
It's a great movie
yes, absolutely.
historically, but he's not a great actor
I mean, if you think about it,
compared to Johnny Depp.
well, I know, like, if we're gonna go Karate Kid for a second, like, there was what? There was Karate Kid, then there was the second Karate Kid. I don't remember if there was a third
There is
one.
a third, I
Is
believe.
there? Okay, because like, what I do remember is, okay, there's four. Okay, my bad. So the first, I think it's like the first two. I do remember him, like, being in, but like, I don't know about the other two. Was he in the actual, like, the two other movies? Because that's what I'm trying to remember. Because like, I know him being that. I don't know if he, like, was also in the other two, but that's not really the point here. But my point is he was more well known in, I would say, probably the first and second one, and not so much probably in the other, like, two other ones.
Yeah, I Ralph Macchio. I mean, Charlie Sheen and John Cryer
No,
are
no, no. Yeah,
terrible,
yeah. No,
terrible choices.
no, no, no,
Ben
no.
Stiller is another
No,
terrible
I mean,
choice.
Robert Downey Jr., like I said, it's
Yeah,
an interesting choice, but I definitely would not have picked him
yeah,
as especially as his role.
yeah.
Again, great actor, but don't think he should have been doing that role in the
Right.
early '80s. But
So Doc Brown.
okay, now we go on. Thank you.
So Doc Brown. There were really only two people that were initially chosen for that character, and Christopher Lloyd is not the first person.
No, and actually, surprisingly enough, this guy, John Lithgow, which I know, and he's been in a lot of movies, he's been in a lot of stuff.
Yes,
I understand that at that time he was unavailable, but then it was offered to Christopher
it
Lloyd.
was offered to Christopher Lloyd because yes, John Lithgow was unavailable. But those two guys were the only two guys that were first considered. There were others considered, but those two guys were the only ones that were really considered for the role.
I mean, John Lithgow, in some ways, I probably could see him, being Doc, but I think with the Christopher Lloyd aspect, I mean, he was just more exaggerated with a lot of, like,
Yeah.
his way of saying, like, "Great Scott," and
Yeah.
like, how he was acting,
1.21 gigawatts.
you know, like, the way he was acting, like,
Yeah.
it made that role, and I think that's why, if John Lithgow did it, like, he does
I
some
think
funny moments, but
if you put, I think John Lithgow and Eric Stoltz together,
I think it would have
I
been
think that
interesting.
they would have been more serious, and I think that that would have changed the direction of the movie.
So what if they did like an alternate universe where, it is, Christopher, Lloyd and Michael J. Fox together, and then it's both Eric Stoltz and John Lithgow. Like, you know what I mean? It'd be kind of weird, but like, that would be an interesting concept, like to have both of them in like different realities.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, John Lithgow. I mean, I do love him as an actor, but um, you know, I think the only guy that I would actually consider as Doc Brown would be Christopher Lloyd because he was iconic for the role. And I mean, there were others considered. I mean, some of the other guys considered. I mean, Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, which, and no, granted, like Jurassic Park, I mean, he did an amazing job in, but like knowing,
I don't know if Jeff Goldblum has that same
no, I honestly,
excitement that Christopher Lloyd has.
no, and I agree, but I think Jeff Goldblum would be really kind of weird in that role because it was the way he would act, especially now. Like, his way of acting is not how I would have pictured Doc Brown. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, if you picture him in Jurassic Park and then you put him in, I'm
I mean,
sorry,
no, no.
but if you just put him in Back to the Future and he just has those really weird dramatic pauses, it really just makes it really weird.
I mean, but the thing is then he'd be like, "Great Scott," it'd be like this weird pause in between
Yeah.
even words, and so, granted, the Jurassic Park series didn't happen until a lot later than these movies, but looking at it, now I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine
I
him
mean,
doing
some of
that.
the other guys, Dudley Moore. I mean, he was big in the '80s, but I couldn't see him doing it. Robin Williams. I mean,
That would have been funny though.
if you really wanted crazy,
Then that would have been the role.
Robin Williams would have been crazy. That would have been off the wall. And I don't think Robin Williams couldn't have pulled it off, but I think it would have been more offbeat comedy than it would have
Oh
been
yeah.
like
No,
what Christopher Lloyd did.
I agree, and I think it would have been probably the most
If
serious movie you would ever see, though.
anybody could have pulled this off, would have been John Cleese.
Yes, and I think with
John
the
Cleese
yeah,
could have pulled this role off.
and I think with the British, kind of humor that he's already done in the past,
Yes.
I think it would have been a great kind of role.
Especially like his experience with, Monty Python and a lot of the sketch comedy that he's done. Like
He could
he,
have improvised easily.
he's the guy that could have pulled it off. Um, Manny Patinkin, if you don't know who that guy is, he's the guy from Princess Bride. He's also from a lot of different shows.
He's basically in one of my favorite
He's
scenes
he's
in that
he's
movie.
John's boy, as I call him.
Well, because I had to realize what he meant by that, but basically, it's the guy who plays Indigo Montoya. So he goes,
You killed my father.
he's like, "My name is Indigo Montoya. You killed
my
my father, prepare to die." And then he would say it
Prepare-
multiple times.
Prepare to die.
But again, I can't imagine him doing it because
No,
it's
not
just
at all.
not somebody I would have
And
imagined.
a couple other guys, Gene Hackman and James Woods.
James Woods would have been.
James Woods. I mean, come on.
I mean, all I think of is like the Family Guy thing. It's the
All I
"Ooh,
think
he's
about
skating."
is James Woods in the movie Vampires, and I go, "What? James Woods as Doc Brown?" I mean, if you wanted maybe a horror movie or some offbeat, like inappropriate comedy,
Sure, you
like
could have.
sure,
Yeah, absolutely.
but not for Back to the Future.
Yeah, and a lot of the other actors, like some of them I knew, some of them I don't. Like
I don't know Ron Silver.
I had to look him up. I honestly did not know who he was, and I actually looked at some of the movies, and I had no idea, and I really don't really care to know if he would have been
I
a
mean,
good
yeah,
Doc Brown.
he was in a lot of '80s movies, but I mean, nothing that was like
Significant.
significant and nothing that was like, Back to the Future. But Christopher Lloyd, I mean, he was a perfect choice for the role. I mean, he was
No, I hands down. Like if you chose somebody else, I mean, I would say the only other person I would say like you and I agree on is John Cleese. Like
yeah,
I think John Lithgow maybe in some ways, but not to a degree. But I think John Cleese with the improv
yeah.
and how he would do it, I think he would have done well in that sense.
So one of the, I think most times when you see a dog in a movie, nobody really ever knows the name of the dog.
I mean, that's true. I mean, because it depends on how many times they say it. Because like unless
Yeah.
they go, "All right, Lassie," or like, "Come here, boy," in whatever
And
the
I
name
think
is. But
even Lassie's name probably wasn't Lassie. I'd have to look that up. But we have Einstein, who is Doc Brown's dog, who's a Catalan sheepdog. That's the kind of dog that Einstein is.
I guess I didn't know that. That was not something
I had to
knew.
look it up. I didn't know either, but he's a Catalan sheepdog, and Einstein's name is actually Tiger.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I love how it's two
and
extremes, but
initially in the script, Doc Brown did not have a dog. He actually had a chimpanzee named Shemp.
yeah. So that's interesting because all I could think of is literally the Three
The
Stooges.
Three Stooges, yes.
Shep, being a moron, but
But it was one of those things like the creators and the producers and the studio kind of came back and was like, movies that feature chimps never succeed. So they ultimately changed it to a dog.
what was there was a movie with Tom Hanks, and he
Well,
had a
that was Turner and Hooch.
yeah, there you go. So like I mean, granted, I mean,
I think there was a Clint Eastwood movie too, where there was a chimp in the movie too, but
right, that was a long time ago, but
that was
yeah.
a long, long time ago. But yeah, I mean, I think most times like we see dogs in movies. I mean, yeah, like I think Cujo is a perfect example.
Yeah,
No,
no, yep. No, you're
everybody
right.
associates the name of that dog to Cujo, but that's not the dog's name. I don't know the dog's name. If you want to send us a message, send us a message.
'Cause I'd love to know.
I don't know the dog's name, but the dog's name is not Cujo.
I
But everybody like you see the dog and they're like, oh yeah, that's Cujo. No, it's not. There's an actual name for that dog.
all I could think of is a little like side story, but my dog, well, let me rephrase this. It's my dad's dog and my stepmom's dog. His name's Fritz. Okay, and this kid across this, literally right next door. Okay, this dude is probably, I don't know, 15, 16 years old, maybe. Okay, and this guy has a pity for their pet too, to be exact. And the worst part is, Fritz is this like little I don't even know what you call him. He's basically a mutt. But yes, the point is though is this dog is tiny. Okay, he's about 8 9 years old, and this kid all of a sudden, he was walking by, and then Fritz was like, growling at him and like running after him, and then he was literally running the other way. Okay, mind you, this dog is like 10 pounds. He's not that big. Okay, but he called him Cujo, and that's why I started laughing because it was the funniest thing when I heard this story. And then it was funny. My dad was walking Fritz one day, and the kid walks by, and he's like, "Get him! Go get him! Come on! Go get him!" And he was just like trying to get after him, and then of course the kid just starts trying to run away again. And I'm like, "Are you really afraid of a 10 pound dog? No offense, that you could kick over a fence? Like, come on! Like I would." If it's like a pit bull or Rottweiler or something like that, I'd probably be more apt to
Oh yeah,
start running
yeah.
the other way than a 10 pound dog. No
Like
offense,
a
that I could kick.
yeah, like a 10-pound Chihuahua or something. Like I'm gonna field goal that.
No, I was gonna say Chihuahuas are like
Yeah,
2 pounds. Get that right, because they're not 10.
no, they're probably not 10, but
But no, I know what you mean though. But yeah. Anyways, I know the kind of like following up with the other characters. So Leah Thompson was Lorraine McFly.
which there wasn't really any. I mean, from what I can research on her, there wasn't really any stories or anything to share
Well, no, yeah,
really on her character. She just, Leah
happened to,
Thompson
yeah.
played Lorraine McFly, and she was the character throughout this, the trilogy. So
Yeah, and I mean, even the next character, George McFly, who's of course Marty McFly's dad, and he's kind of an important, kind of character, and especially in the
yes,
first movie, is Crispin Glover. So I know he's been in. I know he was in Charlie's Angels. He was
right.
in like a villain wise. Um,
Which I mean, even in from the first movie, like he's in the first movie,
oh yeah, no, no, yeah,
and
like
and,
he's
and
in
we
the
we
first scenes.
we know that he's in the first movie. When it comes to the second movie, that's where it gets really tricky because in the second movie, he actually had a and the story changes depending on like who you talk to, like what article you read, because one article or somebody that you talk to might tell you like, oh yeah, he had a salary dispute, which is why he never did part 2 and 3.
Interesting.
The other side of the story is he didn't actually agree with how part 1 ended, because part 1, again, if you haven't seen the movie, stop listening, go to a Flowers
Yeah.
podcast and listen to that for a second.
Spoiler alert.
Watch
Just
the
saying.
movie and then come back. Welcome back.
Welcome back to the series.
So, at the end of the movie of the first one, as you know, like when they come back, like his parents are rich, like they're pretty wealthy, like
Yeah, they're well off. Yeah,
they got money, like Marty has a new truck, like him and Jennifer like
yeah.
go are they're getting in the truck and they're going for a ride, and that's when
Doc
Doc
comes
shows
back.
up. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's like what Crispin Glover had a problem with, was he felt like that they only went into the past to fix, like it was kind of like a corporate like greed, they were only in it for the money, and that was kind of the narrative that that first movie was sharing, and that was kind of the reason why he didn't want to do part 2.
See, and I disagree with him because, like, when I look at it, it's more like, yes, Marty, in a lot of ways, screwed it up. I mean, you can blame the son on this one, but like, he fixes it, and then basically, he was like basically overcoming a bully, right? Because that's really what George was doing, going against Biff. Like that was that
And I
that
think that
scene.
that's I mean, that's the change that was made, and I think you have to kind of look at like, I don't think George initially did that in the initial story where he stood
Yeah,
up to Biff, where he actually did stand up to Biff, and that's the kind of change that was made. But like in the, Crispin Glover was only in the first movie and did not do part 2 or part 3. And there was another actor that actually took his place. And that was what the problem was Crispin Glover actually sued Universal
Oh,
because
wow.
what ended up happening was this new guy that took over um actually had prosthetics put on him to
Ah,
make him look like Crispin Glover. And we're gonna talk about more of this in in the next episode. But they did more things like putting him in the background instead of
the fourth, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
and,
technically, like, in the second one, when he was, like, what was he did he yeah, he was hanging upside down.
right. And that was
Yeah.
another thing. Like they made him hanging upside down. Like they did tricks to make him not look like Crispin Glover, but they still had the prosthetics on him to make him look like Crispin Glover.
Yeah, that okay, that makes
And so
sense.
they used his likeness. And this is kind of the crazy part, and I'm not going to go into the writer strike. I'm
Of
not going to
course.
go down that rabbit hole, but in the Screen Actors Guild, th- this is Crispin Glover suing Universal. He actually won. So I want everybody to know Crispin Glover actually won this suit against Universal and Back to the Future
Oh, well, that's
because
good.
of them using his likeness. Um the Screen Actors Guild actually put this as one of their, you know, um one of their like kind of rules in filming, like that studios cannot use likenesses in films without the actor's consent, which is exactly what the writers right now are striking about because they're trying to use AI
Right, for the likeness.
for their likeness, even though, and maybe AI is not exactly included in the writing of whatever this rule is.
Well, I mean, because if you think about it, I mean, granted, I don't know if this was the first movie that they did that with, per se. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's probably another, like, history lesson that we'd have to look into. But, like,
Yeah, I'm sure this happened in the past.
I'm wondering if because of something like this, because it was an uproar and kind of bringing it, like, they only made that rule because of what they had for technology. Where now we've been so advanced that now with AI, yes, you could literally, or even like CGI. I mean, literally CGI is another thing that they've, of course they've done. And like, I think of like, the Fast movies or like the Fast and Furious movies, right? Where, of course, Paul Walker died on the set of, well, unfortunately, he died filming, Fast and Furious 7, but they used his brother instead and then, replaced his face. But like, it's the same situation where,
Well, they did this in The Crow.
yeah, because, well,
When
granted, he
when when
died,
when Brandon Lee literally died in the filming of The Crow,
right.
they literally replaced his face for the rest of the filming.
No, and that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that, unfortunately, like, those two examples, I mean, were more, I don't know if there was like prior approval or something like that from the families or something like that, but, doing the AI thing now, yeah, I mean, when you do movies or music videos or whatever media there is, it seems like you can literally just say, you know what, I'm gonna look like Tupac today, or I'm gonna look like, uh, Christina Aguilera if I wanted to feel like, being like that. I don't know. I'm just throwing names out here because off the top of my head, but like, that's the kind of stuff that I can agree that, if you're a famous actor, musician, whatever it is, that's cool, but it should not, it shouldn't be like you and I being like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna look like the Dwayne the Rock Johnson today because that's how I feel like doing it.
Well, it's one of those problems. I mean, and this is maybe a conversation for another day, but it's one of those things like where studios like, yeah, they shouldn't be just using AI like, hey, we need someone who looks like The Rock for this role. Let's use AI. We can put him in. We don't need to get his permission because he already works. He already has a contract with the studio.
Right. And like, and that's the problem with nowadays. I mean, that's the problem with like big corporations. They think they own everything, and guess what? I mean, yes, they unfortunately do own everything, but it sucks that they get to play these games and we can't do anything about it because
Yeah.
we don't have fancy lawyers. We
Yeah.
don't have any of this stuff to like, battle
And
against them.
I will be the first one to say, like, I don't care about the writer strike or about the actor strike. I literally like I don't care.
No,
Like
yeah, no,
they can strike all they want. It doesn't mean that I care about what they want. Like,
So
they can go back to work like everybody else. Like,
no,
I really
no,
don't I really don't
yeah,
care.
no, I
But
agree. Like,
I do care about their rights. Like, I don't think AI should be like if you're doing a movie, I don't think they should be using AI just because maybe you're not available that day, so they're going to use AI to just film your scenes. Like
no, yeah,
that to me is not okay, but like to say like I'm going to go on strike because I want more money.
no, no,
No.
no, that's ridiculous in
You
my
you
opinion.
already make more money.
Than most
Why
Americans.
don't you go to work like the rest of us?
No,
And
and
I'm not going
yeah.
to say anymore, but let's move on.
Of course. Now, when you say something, I can't say anything back. The only thing I was going to say is
I just don't want to go down the
no,
rabbit
no, no.
hole
I'm
of
not
this.
going down the rabbit hole. Okay. So the only thing I was going to say is like when you look at writers, when you look at actors, right? So writers, yes, okay, you make a certain like you probably easily can probably make 75, 100, whatever it is, depending on what show and movies and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I
But
want to
like,
see. Make what's fair for what you're doing.
right.
If you're writing crap, then you should be making crap money.
I mean, if yes, you should be making 30 grand and be like, here's your teacher's
Like
salary for the
the
next
people that
whatever.
wrote She-Hulk, you should be making crap money.
You know,
I'm sorry.
no, I agree. And like that's what I'm saying about,
The people who wrote The Flash, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be making anything.
so I mean, granted, that's why again reboot. But like with actors too, right? I mean,
They should reboot the reboot.
I feel like they should just forget everything.
They should just stop.
I think I think DC should just stop. But anyways, all I'm saying is like with actors and writers, right? At the end of the day, whatever you're putting in, like that's what you should be getting. You shouldn't be getting literally
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm gonna make $100,000 for basically making the Flash movie, and that's it. Like,
I'm gonna say it, John. I'm gonna say it.
okay, I thought we didn't want to go down the rabbit hole.
I'm gonna just say this one thing.
Okay,
Whatever happened to imagination?
there you
Like,
go. No, I agree.
whatever happened to using imagination?
No, yeah,
I
agree.
understand like not using AI, and that should be that should be number one. Like I shouldn't have to go to AI to come up with ideas.
So
Like
yeah.
if I'm writing a script for Batman, I should not have to go to Chat GPT to go give me ideas to write a Batman script.
No, I agree. I think the only thing is though, is that if you're gonna do that, then we've already talked about this. Talk to fans.
If I have to do that, I should go to my supervisor or the studio and I should go, I quit.
No,
Because
because you can't do your job. Yeah.
if I'm a writer for a Batman movie or a Batman animated film and I can't write a script for Batman, I don't deserve to be there.
No, I agree. What I'm saying though is like talk to the fans. Talk to little kids, man. I mean, look at how much imagination they have.
Hey,
I mean, talk to anybody who's
if
got
you don't have the
imagination.
imagination to write a Batman script, you shouldn't be writing. Maybe you should write a script on flowers
or
or
ASMR.
shopping or
Yes.
ASMR.
Or
Yeah.
anything. Anyways, we're off track here.
Anyways, so Thomas F. Wilson as Biff Tannen. I don't know if really anybody else was considered, to be honest.
Honestly, in my opinion, even if you tried to have somebody else, I think he just did a good job as playing that bully kind of
Yeah.
scenario.
Well,
like,
I do know that there were other people considered. I just don't know what their names are, but I do know it was the kind of two cronies that he had with him. The two friends that he always had. He had him in the 50s, he had him in the 80s, and he had him in the future. And those two kind of sidekicks, I guess, if you want to call them.
yeah, right. I know they were auditioning for Biff.
Right. Gale and Zemeckis never really considered them as intimidating as Thomas F. Wilson was.
No, and like I said, like he did a good job as playing a bully, and he had that persona. He had that,
Right. And so
that
that,
thing about him.
that's why ultimately like he was taken, as he was put in that role. And, it was funny because like when the name for the character was created, there was a Universal Studios executive named Ned Tannen that had been unpleasant to Gale and Zemeckis, and that's where Biff Tannen's name came from.
It's pretty sad that they're like, you know what, we're just gonna take this guy, this random dude, real quick, and we're just gonna make him his last name in the film just because we want to give him like something.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, man, like make up a different name. You don't have to do that. I mean, granted, I know in like, I think it was in Star Wars. Actually, now I'm thinking about like Poe Dameron was like a it was like a backwards name for I think it was his daughter or like the director's daughter or something like that.
Yeah.
It was something different like that, and that's cool. But like, come on, like, why am I gonna take a producer's
I
last
mean, you
name and
almost
put it in the
wonder like
film?
if some of the like the script choices were something like that this certain executive like said like, like make like a tree and leave, or make like a
Yeah.
tree and get out of here, like you almost wonder if like some of those things like that Biff says in the movie like are things that this guy actually says, or if they're just kind of like making fun of this guy like.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think they're just making fun of him at that point.
Yeah. So the other kind of key component to this movie is obviously the time machine, right? So
Oh, the DeLorean. I mean, it was the most iconic car in the '80s.
in the 80s, yeah. And the DeLorean was, it had the the
The appeal it
it
had
had the
the
doors that
suicide
opened,
doors. Yeah.
yeah. And the DeLorean was actually intended to look like it was fixed together with common parts. So the way that it was made and put together was intentional.
No, and I agree that I think with the look of it, I mean, if you were to do anything different from what it was originally supposed to be, used, it's definitely one of those things um, that I don't think that you could have easily replaced. Like, because if you, I guarantee you now, like, if you had that exact same car and you brought it to an auction now, like right now in like 2023,
Yeah.
I guarantee you that's going to make easily, I'm going to throw a number,
Millions.
I'm going to say like 50, 100 million
Yeah.
because of how iconic. And it's kind of like, uh, was it, I can't even remember now. It was the talking car.
Oh,
The
Kit
Kit. There you
from
go.
Knight Rider. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm sorry. I'm trying to think like something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's gonna go for millions as well. But like that's what I'm saying. Like you take a
Yeah, like
car like
iconic
that.
cars like that, yeah. And what's funny is like the actual quote does has the F word in it, which I'm not gonna say. I'm gonna refrain from doing it in this episode.
Well,
But
wait. This episode.
the Ford Motor Company actually offered a $75,000 Ford Mustang to use in this movie instead of the DeLorean.
Yeah.
And Bob Gale actually responded, Doc Brown doesn't drive a blank Mustang.
So I agree.
And that's the F word.
No. Right.
Yeah.
No. I agree
Yeah.
that if they chose another car for this movie, I don't think it would have been the same. I think it would have probably made it worse. I think because they chose this very carefully in how they wanted to use the DeLorean, I think it really stood out
Yeah, I mean,
versus
like
like
it was
others.
kind of like the gull wing doors. Like I think for them, like when you're looking at 1950s, like there were no cars in the 50s that had doors that open like
Oh
this. So
no,
it was
yeah.
very much like you see doors that open like this, and they probably would have thought, yeah, this is like a UFO or something. Like I don't
Oh
know what this is.
no, I
It
agree.
looks like a car, but I don't know why the doors open like this.
No, you're right. And I mean, especially when, back then, I mean, you're talking cars that were, strictly all metal and like they had great, exteriors and this and like that. And I mean, they were classic cars, but like, back then, um, it just wouldn't have never been the same.
Right.
And like and I just keep saying like the DeLorean, if it was ever changed, it honestly would have made the movie like crap.
Yeah. So there were 3 DeLoreans that were used, or they were purchased from a collector. So there was one that was used for stunts. There was one for special effects, and then there was one. They kind of called it the hero version, that was used for more of like the close up shots. So like them getting in and out of the car. And one of the things that was said in a lot of the articles that I looked up is a lot of them, like, all 3 of them were very unreliable, and they all broke down.
Of course. Of course it did. I mean, it's interesting that, they had to have 3 different cars for literally just even just like little bits of pieces of it.
Well, I think for most movies, I think that, I mean, obviously you look at Fast and Furious, like most movies that have cars in them, I think you have to have multiple versions because
well, yeah, there's wear and tear and
whatever you're doing for the cars, like you have to have like those certain stunt versions where Fast and Furious, like you have, certain cars that are jumping on, jumping ramps and going off
Yeah.
buildings, and like some of those are CGI,
Oh
but
no, no, yeah, of course, but no,
na-
I mean, like you,
nowadays, like, Fast and Furious 25, like
yeah,
they're all
yeah.
CGI, but
No, I agree that with like if you're looking at movies like Fast and the Furious, I mean, they would have had to have multiple cars, they would have had to have certain things, but they're of course just like in Back to the Future, like they have certain cars that are iconic in those movies because it stands
yes.
out, and
Yeah.
like that's why, again, and that's why I keep mentioning it, like if you were probably an '80s kid, right? I guarantee you would have wanted to have a DeLorean, or at least to ride in one or have a chance to do that because
Yes.
that was the car of the '80s. Like plain and simple. Like that's what you would have wanted to drive. Yes, I'm saying
And
this
in high
as
school, when I went to Universal, they had, I don't know if they still do because I haven't been there since high school, but they actually had this on display with the doors open and everything.
I think I don't so I went
It
I
was,
want to say like 2006
I
I think
mean,
is
you
when I
couldn't
went.
actually go in it and sit down and anything because they have, like, they have it closed off. I mean,
Yeah.
not closed off but they have it roped off.
So I think I know what you're talking about because I don't actually know it wasn't 2006 to 2007 I believe, but um or whatever. But the point is I do remember going to Universal, I think it was like in 8th grade, and I I want to say it was still there. I don't know if it is
Yeah.
now because I think they've gotten rid of a lot of things, but I want to say it probably was still there. But I mean, even just getting a chance to like
And most of the
stand
time the
next to
doors
it.
are closed, but when we went, the doors were open. And seeing inside the car was even cooler because, like, you can actually see the flux capacitor and you can see the
Yeah,
dial and
yeah.
everything was on. Like, you can see the dial, you can see, like, all the stuff. It was really cool. But the other cool part was in Universal, like in a certain spot in Universal, you can actually look down and you can actually see the studio
Yes.
where they filmed Back to the Future. So you can see the clock tower, you can see the street, you can see the whole
Yeah.
city.
So I mean, okay, I'm going to mention this. Like, if you ever get a chance to go down to Universal, they have a lot of cool stuff. I mean, even remember back in the day when they had the original Jaws ride, the stupid one,
Yes, I
and
I went on
it was
that.
it was dumb, but it was funny how like the guys were.
Indiana Jones. They had
Yep,
an Indiana
yep.
Jones thing too.
And
Yeah.
they had what was that? I think it was like Men in Black, and they had Twister. They had all these other ones
Did
too.
they have the Terminator thing?
Yes, they would have.
Yes.
Yeah, they would have had it down there. But like, it's crazy. Like, of course, now it's all changed because like, I want to say Harry Potter's a new big one
Yes.
in that kind of
Yeah.
realm, right? But like, there's certain ones in there now that, of course, they've changed. I know they got rid of the Jaws ride. I'm pretty sure they got rid of like Men in Black. So it's kind of it's kind of sucks.
It's shifted. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, I think it was kind of cool if you could experience that kind of
I think
realm.
they had the Magnum PI car too, which was kind of cool. But anyways, um, 88 miles per hour. That was chosen for the time travel speed. One, because it was easy to remember, and two, because the actual dial in the car, quote unquote, I'm using quotations. You can't see them because I'm, only talking.
Of course.
Because it looked cool on the speedometer. But the funny thing about the DeLorean was the top speed on the DeLorean was 85.
Interesting, because I would have thought it would have been a lot faster than
So
85.
the speedometer only went to 85.
So then, how
So
did they
they
get?
actually added a digital
Oh,
speedometer on the dashboard that showed 88.
okay, and that
And
would make sense.
that's why, the 88 looked cool because it was just an 88 and it was easy to remember. And
I mean, technically, I do remember. So I had it was a '96 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and it was a white one. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the fastest speed I could go was like either 80 to 100. Because I think it was weird. Like I think it was like 80s and 90s that they only decided to give you up until like that 80, 100 mile mark. Because after that, it was kind of like you better go into like the supercars or stuff like that. Because literally nowadays, like the highest speed you can go is about 140 for most like cars or trucks or something like that. Like now, but like back then it was like okay, 80, 100 maybe if depending on
yeah, I
the
mean,
type of
and
vehicle.
seriously, like nobody really needs to go 140. I mean,
I mean, if you're a daredevil,
most
yes, but
most highways are only about 70, maybe
eh,
75 at most,
I
but
mean,
like you really don't need to be going 140.
I've seen people go like 100, 120, but I mean,
And
just
and that's
depends.
where you end up with a cross on the Everett Turnpike. I'm just saying.
No, yeah,
I'm
no,
just
you're right.
saying.
You're right. No,
I'm
you're
just
right.
saying. But anyways, so the one thing about the time machine in Back to the Future is it wasn't always a DeLorean.
Okay.
And that might be shocking for some people to hear, but it wasn't always a DeLorean. At one point, it was actually a refrigerator.
So I love how we have Hot Tub Time Machine, right? We have the movie, but
Yeah,
like a refrigerator,
it was actually a refrigerator.
like
And, Spielberg actually vetoed the idea because he was concerned that children watching the movie would be going into their
I
refrigerator,
try to go back in time.
trying to go back in time.
Of
Um,
course.
which I could see, I could kind of see happening. And I think one of the original scripts or stories that I heard was, um, Marty was driving some kind of a box truck or like a truck with a trailer.
Yeah.
Um, and the time machine was in the trailer, like it was part of the truck.
Okay.
And it wasn't like a DeLorean, it was actually in the truck. So he was, um, from the story that I read, was there was some kind of a, like, there was going to be a nuclear explosion, and he was using the nuclear blast to power the time machine so that he can go back in time.
Okay.
And that's like the kind of one of the initial stories. Obviously changed because that didn't quite make sense.
No, no, I agree. I mean, I'm glad that Spielberg, decided to like veto the idea because if it really was a refrigerator, I mean, my God, I feel like everyone would be like, "Hold on, let me just open up the fridge and like, start playing with dials and stuff," and then you're like, "Oh, I guess my refrigerator isn't working now because now you just ruined my fridge." Thank you, but like, no, I agree. Like, I think the idea of having a car, going at fast miles per hour. And granted, probably most kids are like, yeah, I want to get in behind a car now and like, start going 88 miles per hour. But it's like, no, like, listen, that's not. You drive it. Trust me, I've driven about
Yeah, I
that
mean, but
speed. But yeah,
most kids aren't driving cars, so that, I mean, that's a little bit different. But
no, but like, but the thing is though, is that they think in their mind like, oh, okay, I'm gonna, be like a race car
like,
driver and
Dad,
start
go
going.
88 miles an hour. Like,
Yep, gotta go with a clock tower real
no,
quick.
shut up, kid.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
shut up, all right? But, like, I feel like, if you were like, "Hey, we're gonna pass this clock tower. Hold on, let me get this, like, giant hook, ready to go and, like,
Yeah.
go exactly that speed." It's like, "Okay, that's not gonna happen, kid. You're gonna stop, and you're probably gonna fly out the car." But it's cool. But, I think we're good, man. I mean, this part 1, I think, was pretty good. I think, for the most part, it kind of just talked about the whole thing, right? Because, I mean, if you haven't seen this movie, well, sorry, we just spoiled a lot of it for you, but if you haven't,
Well, I mean, the
I
movie came out in '85, so if you haven't seen it,
I
then
mean, that's true. I mean
clearly, us ruining it is the worst of your problems.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you haven't seen it, go check it out because it is really a geeky movie. It definitely kind of embodies, like, again, like what Matt and I talk about all the time, and so, if you like, futuristic and that kind of like, interesting vibes that the '80s give, like that's a perfect, kind of series of films that you should watch, right? And yeah, when it comes down to, our podcast, man, again, hit us up. Tell us how much you like us, whatever you want, man. We're here. We got a merch store that we've been mentioning a little bit about. But if you want to go on there, check us out. I mean, we got t-shirts. Again, we got a hat, we got a few other things. I'm not gonna go into it, but we figured, yeah, hey, go in there, check it out, let us know. And as always,
Stay geeky.